Hi everyone. Today I've decided to share with you a chapter that I wrote a long time ago on the wisdom of fairy tales. And I wanted to share it with you because not only do I think it's something incredibly interesting, it's a reminder of how many places knowledge and wisdom can be found that we often don't normally think of as being a place of wisdom. And this, I'm going to actually read to you parts of a chapter of The Power of Then, my book that came out over 15 years ago for the first time. And I'm just going to share with you some of the chapter today. I'm not going to share all of it. The chapter is also on my website, so the link will be below, and you can go and either follow along. Again, I'm not going to do it exactly as the chapter reads, but you can follow along parts of it and read the rest of it on your own. So the link will be below. Fairy tales have the old version of the fairy tales, and I don't mean the Disneyized version of fairy tales, the modernized, updated, try to put a moral into the story tale. I mean the tale in its original state contains an unbelievable amount of symbolic wisdom. This chapter I studied and wrote probably 18 years ago, 2002, 2003. I haven't updated it. I haven't gone into more detail. So there's lots of things. I looked over the chapter just before I started getting ready to do this. And there's things in this chapter that I don't agree with, or I don't like how I wrote it, or I don't like certain words. I've used the word master a few times when talking about Egyptian temples and things, and there are things that I don't totally agree with anymore. So as long as you know what you're reading, I don't necessarily agree with everything. Certainly if I went back and looked at these tales one more time with fresh eyes in more detail again, I would find way more symbolic things than I found 17 or 18 years ago. But it's hopefully going to give you an opportunity to pick up an original book of fairy tales, and not just ones that come from Europe. I mean ones that come from China, Native Indian mythology, African myths, the myths and the stories from all over the world. Fairy tales have an incredible amount of wisdom. So I'm just going to share with you some of this chapter and see if you find fairy tales as interesting as I do. This won't necessarily be a bedtime story, but hopefully it's a waking up story. We'll start with a quote. Give people a fact or an idea, and you enlighten their minds. Give them a story, and you touch their souls. Georg Feuerstein. Fairy tales are seen as simple rudimentary stories written to entertain little children while providing them with a moral for their behavior. But simple fairy tales are far from simple. They contain hidden hermetic wisdom. The ancients who created these tales at the beginning of time, and thus they are nearly identical, or at least recognizable, all over the earth. As with all mythology, a story is by far the best way to pass on information. Many ask that if the ancients had knowledge, why not just write it in a book like we do, and preserve it for all time in libraries? But the great library in Alexandria contained more than 500,000 scrolls until Christians burnt it down. The Mayans had thousands of books written on bark until the Spanish bishops had all the parchments burnt. During the Middle Ages, if books were not hidden, they were burnt and lost forever. There's no telling how many wondrous works of wisdom went up in smoke all over the earth during the last 2,000 years. And it would be easy, even today, for a government or ruling religious group to deem all books and information on the internet the work of the devil and destroy them all. All the knowledge that was placed in books or in words to last forever could easily be lost in a generation. But mythology and tales are different. They were not created to be placed in books, but to be transmitted orally and stored in the human mind. Is a page of the dictionary or Cinderella easier to remember? The idea being that even if all books were lost, the stories would survive in the memory of the population. And even if the language of an area changes, the books of the old language would be useless, for no one could read them. But the stories kept in the mind could be changed immediately into the new language. And as well, someone Someone without the inner understanding might remember the story and tell it later to someone trained in the mysteries. Thus, people would be keeping the wisdom alive without even knowing they are. In fairy tales, the information was hidden in the stories. The more disguised the information, the less likely the ruling authorities would try to persecute. The stories were made interesting for children, so they could be learned while young. Every time a fairy tale is read to children, powerful esoteric wisdom is being kept alive. The first time we hear a tale, we're children. The second time is when we are parents and reading them to our own children. Likely we've not looked at the tales at all for 20 years, but with more knowledge, as we read, we may understand some of the hidden wisdom. The next time may be when we are grandparents, now with even more knowledge to understand what is being depicted. John Anthony West claimed that the esoteric quality of the tales touches a person's inner being and speaks to our heart. But today the tales are losing their luster. In medieval times, storytellers would travel to local villages and tell the tales during the night. It was entertainment for a population without electric lights, radio, or television. The storytellers would be versed in hundreds of tales, which they knew by heart. To one who has only read a tale and never heard it recited in person has missed a magical event. A story told by a storyteller is brought to life. Just 30 years ago, mythology was still taught in elementary schools, but this is no longer the case, as myth and tales are seen as unimportant in the Western scientific world. Today, children focus on the instant gratification of video games and television. Fairy tales are losing their popularity, but they're not gone completely. Even in the Nintendo generation, the tales are still known. The tales passed on to our children today, though, are shells of their original versions. The stories were carefully woven and depicted and developed, written as much for adults as they were for children. The Brothers Grimm kept the German folk tales alive in the early 1800s and inspired others around the world to do the same. Their original tales, published in 1812, were far different than the same tales reissued in the mid-1800s. The original tales had many references to sex, violence, or taboo subjects, and in some cases they're terrifying. The second version of them edited out many of these references. Most of these topics not suitable for children are rarely found in modern editions. But this was not so in the period prior to the Victorian age. Those who developed those tales wrote in the language of Hermetic symbolism. To cut off one's head or to tie someone to a tree all had important symbolic meaning for the initiates. In fact, some of the symbology was specifically devised to scare off those not wanting to learn the true secrets. And it's a shame that most of the original versions are unknown in the modern world. They're softened Disney-like versions in their place. Children sense the real truth in the old tales instinctively, and know the modern ones are not telling all of it. Read the Disney Cinderella and the Grimm's original version, and it will be no surprise which one will light up the child's eyes. Amazingly, if one simply worked with the original tale, they would find that the heroines were not the passive girls represented in modern text that Alain Dumas described as a sorry excuse for a heroine. The original girls were active, strong-willed, intelligent, and created their own destiny rather than wishing for a fairy godmother or a prince to make everything all right. A tale of wishing and hoping produces girls who grow up to be passive, waiting for their Prince Charming to come along and save them, rather than follow the original tales where they decide what it is they want and then use all of their resources to go and make it happen. Another group who began working with the tales in the 1900s were psychologists. Their books described the tales in the realm of sex, Oedipal feelings, oral fixations, and the like. But the tales were not created by modern psychologists, but by initiates of the ancient mystery schools. And while the tales do have psychological elements, the Hermeticists are teaching the destruction of the conscious mind. The true alchemist was veiling the process of spiritual transformation. Alchemy is also the basis of modern psychology, which is why Carl Jung, to be a spectacular psychologist, first had to be a spectacular alchemist. Fairy tales have similarities in their construction and their writing. Usually there's a difficult set of tasks, a quest for treasure, that is usually guarded by monsters. The goal is achieved through intelligence, courage, sustained effort, and purification of some sort. The quest is actually the path of the spiritual adept. The prize may be a prince, a princess, or jewels, symbolizing the goal of the high initiate, which is enlightenment. That is why these stories end happily ever after, as by the end of the tale the main characters are no longer of the material or physical world. They are now initiates and live in a different way, in a different relationship with the universe and its creator. Following are examinations of 3 of the best-known tales, Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, and the Ugly Duckling. It can be helpful to find a version of the tale before reading the following commentary to add to your understanding. Let us begin. I will start first in a little different order than is in the book, that is in your article. I will start with the Ugly Duckling. The Ugly Duckling is truly a story of esoteric and alchemic wisdom. The story immediately points to its Egyptian roots. The tale begins with storks, who walked on their long red legs, talking Egyptian because that was the language they had been taught by their mothers. By the way, I'm using the oldest version of these tales, so I've got the oldest version of the Ugly Duckling. I believe this comes from either Grimm's or even an earlier German version. They walked on their long red legs, talking Egyptian because that was the language they had been taught by their mothers. The stork is a version of the ibis, the great bird of Tahuti. The mention of the Egyptian language at the beginning of a Danish tale it's Denmark where I got this tale from, alerts our readers right away to what will be forthcoming, some of the hidden Hermetic wisdom of Thoth. Before we even meet the newborn duck, we are told of a setting full of woods, places where it is dark and difficult to navigate through, like the process of wisdom the initiate will undertake. The area has a number of hidden pools and lakes, water referring to the power of meditative reflection to look at the self and know the self. In the forest between a moat and a castle are stalks so high that a child could stand upright under them and imagine they were in the middle of the woods. The child symbolizes one at the beginning of the journey, as the wise master is depicted as being elderly. The high stalks show the process to be worked on will be high up, the head and the mind. Also the mention of imagination is made. Alchemists see this as part of what they call the prima materia, or the first matter. The child will use their imagination, but as adults we lose this ability. And it is this imagination which allows us to connect to the realm of spirit above. The mother duck builds her nest in this place and sits with her eggs feeling sorry for herself because it was taking so long and nobody came to visit her. This statement is explaining the initial steps of the process. With no one coming to visit, it would be quiet, thus a perfect time for meditative practice. There is also reference to the length of time it takes. Personal transformation is a long process, no matter what New Age seminars try to tell you. You will not be transformed or ready to heal after taking a weekend course. The process will take your full effort for a long time, and you will have to confront your inner demons that most people would rather not admit having. Most would rather be like the other ducks that preferred swimming in the moat or gossiping, opposed to being quiet in meditation. All of the eggs hatch except for one. The mother is tired and asks for help from an old duck to come and help her, but simply says, "It's a turkey egg." He tells the mother to forget about it and go ahead in life with the others. This, of course, is the ego talking. When we begin the steps for transformation, we will see some small successes, but often the big ones are right around the corner. The ego is afraid of relinquishing total control of our being, so it tries everything to trick us into stopping our work. It does not want us to continue to our goal, the complete destruction of itself. So here the duck tells the mother to forget the egg and go on. The mother, however, decides she has put this much effort, she can afford a little more. And this is a wise message for all of us to keep putting in effort. Eventually the egg hatches, but the duckling is deemed to be ugly and not like the other ducks. That one is not like the others is a clear reference to one who is following a mystery or spiritual path. They begin to realize that they are not like the rest of the people in the world who are only interested in the physical and the material. In many versions, the duckling is shown to be black. Black is the first stage of the alchemical process, negretto, or calcinatio. Here we seek to use our fire on ourselves as we find what is impure in our makeup and burn ourselves down to a black ash that will be worked with in the later stages, as happened in Cinderella. This is a torturous time, as one has to uncover most of their shadow elements, impure thoughts, and most awful experiences of life. What is not looked at here gets looked at in future stages. This difficult time is echoed in the ugly duckling. A mention is made of a family of ducks who get into a fight over the head of an eel. The eel, like the snake, is slippery and moves all over like the thoughts of the conscious mind. The mind needs to attain a stillness to gain wisdom. The fight is over the head, a direct reference to the mind, but the cat swipes it. In the Egyptian papyrus of Ani, what we call the Book of the Dead, the cat, the powers of feminine reflection, cut off the head of the serpent Apop, the arch-enemy of the sun god Ra. Apop keeps us from the light by moving conscious thoughts in our mind. But the cat, representing feminine meditation, is able to cut off the head of the serpent, our thoughts, to allow stillness and the emergence of the light. By meditation here, of course, I mean practice on seeing and observing the mind. The other ducks begin to tease the ugly duck mercilessly. Look how ugly he is. He's big, and he doesn't look like everyone else, and that is reason enough to beat him. Eventually, even his own mother wants the ugly duckling to go away. As mentioned, the initial black stage of the process is a very difficult one. One must follow a special path to wisdom, while the rest of the world is following the path of physical gratification. To be different than the rest is to be attacked by the rest for being an outcast. Even family and friends are likely to mock one who follows a true spiritual calling. Finally, the duck has had enough of the insults and attacks, and he runs away to be alone and closed his eyes. This act represents not only the need to be alone so as to meditate properly, but is also the fact that one has to be strong and eventually will have to stop spending time with the general uninitiated population. Spiritual advancement depends on it. The duckling winds up in a swamp where wild ducks live. They admit he is ugly, but invite him along anyway. While in the swamp, he meets two male ganders. They represent those on the material path, for they want the duckling to come with them to go and meet some beautiful wild geese. Almost immediately, a hunter comes and kills the two ganders. This is showing what happens if one is on the spiritual path gives in to the temptations of the physical world. And the fact they are killed is also another representation that they are of the physical and they will die in the physical. At this point, dogs come running, the barking mind that must be tamed, and they bare their teeth. Shamans warn that while on a journey, if one sees a spirit animal bare their teeth, that animal should be avoided. The duckling does that, hiding and laying very still in a deep meditative place, and the dogs quietly turn away. The duckling manages to still the mind and overcome physical temptation. As he runs away, a wind comes up that nearly stops his progress, symbolic of that which will come to try to keep us from continuing on the path. The duckling finds an old hut where an old woman lives with a hen and a cat. This may represent finding a temple or teachers. The fact that the duckling has gone through tremendous hardship and work shows that the duck was ready for more advanced teachings. While there, the duck thinks he shouldn't be allowed to have that he should be allowed to have a different opinion than his other housemates. But the woman gets angry and asks if he could lay eggs like a hen or make sparks like the cat. When the duck replies no, he is told, then keep your mouth shut. You have no right to an opinion when sensible people are talking. If the hut represents a temple environment, then this line would make sense. When the student is first working with a great teacher, they usually must take a vow of silence so they can spend their time listening to the wisdom of that teacher. The duckling was asked if he could perform the feats of the other initiates in training, symbolized by the animals in the house. When the duckling said he could not, the masters were in a sense telling him to shut up and listen to the sources of wisdom so that he might learn to have the power that the other students have gained. As long as he is talking about his own ideas, he cannot learn the truth from those around him. The old woman replies, "That's the truth, and I'm only telling you for your own good." That is the sign of a true friend. It is someone who's willing to tell you the truth, no matter how unpleasant it may seem at the time. Ones who love their pupil so much that they will show them the truth of the universe and themselves, often which is terrifying and unpleasant. One has to realize the Master is doing this for our benefit because they want us to experience the universal truth and find out what is inside of us which truly needs to be transformed. The duck finally leaves, after likely acquiring a large amount of wisdom, and comes to another lake. A raven, another black sign of Negretto, looks at the duckling and says, "What a terrible time the duckling must have had." The raven is speaking of the hell the duck must have gone through, but is also referring to the fact that he is close to making it to the next white stage. The lake here may refer to the white stage of dissolution and albedo, a purification of the black ash by the white water. Just then the duckling sees swans, the white birds that are flying south for the winter. And this is showing that the duckling is not yet at the white stage, but the birds fly south for the winter, but they will fly back in the next spring. As the weather grew colder, the duck keeps swimming in circles, perhaps representing the fact that we are constantly given lessons, but we don't learn them. We come right back full circle again, repeating our old habits and patterns. The hole in the ice keeps getting smaller, until finally he's too tired to swim, and sat still, for his patterns finally took him nowhere. The ice comes around and freezes him solid. Thus, when we finally stop running in circles to stare our lessons in the face, we are overcome by it. A farmer, though, one who grows things and transforms seeds, frees the duckling with his shoe, and takes the bird to his wife, who brings the duckling back to life. After seeing and fully integrating the lesson, we are ready to let go of it, and the part of us that was not allowing us to move past it. While with the farmer, the duckling flew into a milk pail and into flour, both white, and representing the stage of albedo and the whitening purification that has now taken place. Finally spring comes, and the swans return. The duckling now has strong and powerful wings, reference to the power and knowledge that he has gained. Yet the duckling finally decides to let the swans kill him, meaning he is finally ready to sacrifice his old self, the ruling ego, and allow that ego to be killed. "Kill me," he whispers to the swan. At this point, the duckling looks in the water and sees that he is actually a swan himself, an initiate. The process had happened some time ago, but he had not yet noticed the actual change. He was thankful that he had known so much want and gone through so much suffering, for it made him appreciate his present happiness and the loveliness of everything about him all the more. A perfect thing to say by someone who has reached unity with the all. Children then run out shouting, "Look, there's a new one," as the priests would announce new initiates to the group. Cakes and bread were cast onto the lake for the swans, the cake being an Egyptian symbol of the end of an initiation process that, over time, became our traditional birthday cake. That was the ugly duckling. Let us look at one more for the sake of this video. We can, the book has Little Red Riding Hood and Cinderella. Perhaps we'll go to Cinderella because that's one that is so well known by so many people. So let's try Cinderella. The tale of Cinderella can be found in more languages and parts of the world than any other myth, except that of Osiris and Isis. It is found in Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, North and South America. Its widespread presence immediately shows the importance of the tale, for it has survived in so many places around the world. Two of the oldest versions of the story, of the myth, are the Egyptian story of Rhodopus and a story from 800 AD in China called Yi H Xian. Unfortunately, the best-known version is actually the most divergent of all the Cinderella tales. The version most people know is made famous by the Disney movie and comes from a book of fairy tales by Charles Perrault in 1670s France. Perrault was a member of the court of Louis XIV and wrote a very odd version. He added a moral, as he did with the story of Little Red Riding Hood. And for this reason, one must go to the even older versions, where the true wisdom is to be examined. And just as an aside, remember, these versions of fairy tales that Charles Perrault wrote in France in 1670 happens and links back to all of the stuff I'm talking about, Rennes le Chateau. This is the exact period of time just after Poussin has finished writing doing his paintings and died, that the Society of St. Sacrament has been taken away, and that in many cases the Society at St. Sulpice has had to go more underground. As these wisdom societies began to be taken away, new sets of fairy tales that take out the wisdom are brought in to the world. Interesting, huh? So the true Cinderella tales have common elements. Usually a young girl, but sometimes a boy, is persecuted and mistreated by their family. They receive some sort of magical help so they can be recognized for the good and beautiful person they are and marry the prince or princess. There is usually a proof of identity, often by a shoe that is usually golden. A hearth and ashes, dirtiness of the main character, are common, as are helpful animals, a magic tree, 3 visits to a dance or a church, with 3 times running away, and Cinderella succeeding through intelligence and courage. Those familiar with the Perrault Disney version will notice her shoe is made of glass in that story, not gold. There are no magic trees, she goes to the dance only once, and Cinderella is not intelligent or courageous, but whines and wishes for things. So let us look at a very early version, known as Aschenputtel. This is the oral version found in Grimm's, which is much more closer to the European oral tradition. And even though Grimm's edited this version in their second book, it is important to work with the original from the 1812 version. That story starts with the death of the girl's mother, who as she died promised to be with her always. When the father remarried the new wife and brought 2 daughters with her. The stepsisters were fair to look upon, but dark and ugly in their hearts. The evil, ugly stepsisters are common to the Cinderella stories, and they represent the physical and material world of duality that we live in. In truth, there is only absolute, but without wisdom, we see the world in terms of opposites. Notice that in most of these stories, the stepsisters will always be concerned with physical reality. The stepsisters wore good clothes and gave the girl only ugly ones and wooden shoes. They forced the girl to work in the kitchen and do numerous chores. The girl had nowhere to sleep but the hearth among the ashes. We are told that because she was always dusty and dirty, she was called Aschenputtel. And a lot of information is already provided here. The name Aschenputtel is a German word for a pot that sits in the fireplace. The word ties in with the work she is forced to do in the kitchen. The heat represented here is the initial stage of the alchemic process that requires heat to break down the impure elements of the body to an ash. The blackened state, negretto or calcinato, is represented by the fact that she must sleep in the hearth with the ashes, thus becoming black. In our modern version, her name is Cinderella, the cinders referring to the blackened state that must occur. This state requires a complete breakdown of our association with reality and who we think we are. In the story, the breakdown is represented first by the death of the mother, and then with the introduction of the stepsisters and stepmother. She works constantly without hope, a common experience of those going through negretto. Speaking from experience, negretto is a time of illness, depression, and complete overturning of who one thinks they are and what they think the world to be. The father, before going to a fair, asks the children what they want him to bring back. The stepsisters, of course, want fine clothes, jewels, and pearls, all material elements of the dualistic physical world. Aschenputtel instead wants the first twig that strikes her father on the way home. She asks for something in the realm of nature, which is the first discipline learned in the alchemic process. What he brings back for her is a hazel branch. Hazel is a type of wood that is symbolic of rebirth, and thus will help in the rebirth of her dead mother and the girl's personal attachment to the spirit world. She plants that branch over the grave of her mother and cries, which causes the tree to grow from her tears. Again, the second stage of the alchemic process is dissolution, or solutio, where the element of water is used to work with the ash and clean it away. It does so by exposing the hidden emotions of the body, and involves the process of crying, whereby we look at all of the hurts we are holding, finally to release them. Only then can we grow. The fact that the tree grows over the grave signifies that the gifts she will receive from this place on, are beyond the physical world. She sits under the tree three times a day, 3 the number of the process. A white bird comes to the tree and brings her whatever she asks for. The white dove is also a symbol of albedo, which is seen as the whitening, whereby the black is being purified. The king announces a 3-day dance. Notice it's 3 days. And all the beautiful women are invited. When Aschenputtel wants to go, her mother and sisters laugh. She is forced to pull lentils out of the ashes. With help, though, of magic birds, she accomplishes the task, but over and over again, the stepmother throws more lentils on the fire, and Aschenputtel cries more and more each time. This is showing the length of time that can be involved in the process of dissolution into albedo, with continued pain and work as more buried events come to the surface. Even though she completes the work, the stepmothers and stepsisters leave for the dance without her. Picking the lentils out of the fire can also represent the stage of separatio, where one must separate out the negative parts of the being from those which are good and pure. Aschenputtel asks for help from her mother's grave. The white bird provides a dress of gold and a pair of silver and silk slippers that get Aschenputtel to the dance. At the ball, her own stepfamily does not recognize her. And this is a key point of the story that's often overlooked. Why do they not recognize her? This is answered in the Cinderella tale of the Micmac Native Americans, where only the heroine is able to see the invisible one. Shamans call the ability to break free of illusion or maya as a type of seeing. The average person looks at things, but the shaman sees their real essence. We see a person or a table, but the shaman will see what something really is, and may not be fooled by outer appearance. The stepfamily could not see Aschenputtel because they are of the physical world and have not gained the wisdom to allow them to see the true identity of the new arrival. The king's son dances with no one else, saying to other men who ask, "No, she is my partner." This is referring to the step called conjunction, where our male and female halves of our being must be brought together. At the end of the evening, the prince wants to see Aschenputtel home to know where she lives, but she runs away to hide in the dove's treehouse. The tree representing the chakras is cut down, and we find no one in the house. The father wonders if it had been her daughter, but then finds Aschenputtel at home in her dirty clothes with an oil lamp burning in the chimney, again representing the work to be done on the 7 chakras. The entire scene repeats itself, again this time with Aschenputtel climbing up a pear tree after returning from the dance. The Maya used the pear tree to represent the heart in their symbolic teachings. For the third dance, Aschenputtel is given gold slippers by the magic birds. And when she tries to run away this time, the prince places pitch, a type of tar, all over the stairs that causes her right shoe to get stuck. The tar on the stairs may represent the dark matter in our subconscious which clings to the feet, thus makes the path difficult to follow. It's also important that it is her right shoe that she loses and not her left. The right side is our active side, and losing this shoe would be taking away her ability to act. As in most of the Cinderella stories, the shoes are made of gold representing the final stage of the process, our astral body. Hermes is often shown in gold shoes with wings representing the golden astral self that can travel anywhere. The shoe is always key to the story, and often the prince or king never even meet Cinderella but only find her shoe. The shoe is said to be small and slender, and he promises to marry whoever it fits. The human foot, as shown in reflexology, contains a connection with every other part of the human body. Of course, every part has a connection to the human body, but, the foot reflexology is most well known. Thus, for one who can read such things, to have one shoe would be enough to completely know everything about that particular person. That is why the prince or king, if being an adept, would never need to meet the girl in person, only see the shoe. In the Aschenputtel version, the prince searches far and wide for the shoe's owner. When he comes to the family's house, the stepsisters are tried first. This part is often omitted in modern versions, and that is the stepmother has the sisters cut off pieces of their feet in order to fit in the shoes. One cut off a toe, for when you're a queen, you'll never have to walk again. The shoe fits the stepsister's foot, but as the couple starts to ride away, 2 doves on the hazel tree tell the prince to look at the blood on the shoe. Thus the shoe is not a perfect fit. The second sister cuts off a heel, but with the same result, with the help of the magic doves. The dove asks the prince both times to turn around and look behind him. This symbol is often displayed in medieval art, with a person or animal turning around. It refers to the need for one to turn their gaze back on themselves and look with a meditation and reflection at what they've always believed to be the truth. The prince does this and sees the new truth that the shoes do not fit. Thus the sisters are not the girl from the ball. And this is an example of how we must look back on ourselves to find everything that is truly impure, even the things we have hidden from ourselves or have always found an excuse for. Before Aschenputtel tries on the shoes, she washes her face and hands, another example of the continued purification. The golden shoe fits perfectly, and the prince knows that this is his bride. The astral body has been perfected, and the wedding can now happen. The chemical wedding that all on the path are attempting to complete inside ourselves, with the male and female halves combined. At the wedding, the doves pluck out the eyes of the stepsisters, thus guaranteeing they will never be able to see with the eye of Horus. This tale mentions they will go blind for the rest of their days, meaning that they will never, due to the wickedness of their hearts, be able to see the light. I'll stop there. The rest of this chapter is available again at the link below. I continue on with other stories of Cinderella, including Po de Nijo, a French version of the story. I look at the Yi H Sien, the Chinese version. I look at an Irish story where a boy is in the main role. That's Billy Beg and the Bull. And there's also a long piece of information on Little Red Riding Hood, known in the Grimm's Tale as Little Red Cap. And there's quite a lot of information in Little Red Riding Hood, so I highly recommend that. Again, the point of sharing all this with you was just to give you an opportunity to look in different places for wisdom, look in different places for knowledge. And when you begin to catch on the old symbolism, particularly the symbolism of the time period these were being formed in the early Middle Ages, the pre-Middle Ages, what is the symbolism? What is the messages that were wanting to be presented, and how are they being presented? And then you can start picking up any fairy tale, any myth, and you can start digging through it, and you'll see instantly, there's the reference to the 3. I know what that is. A reference to 7. I know what that is. A reference to a dove. I know what that is. A reference to a cooking fire. I know what that is. A reference to, and you'll start to see the tales. The tales will come to life for you. The knowledge will start to appear. When it was unclear before, knowing the symbols and knowing that it's there will give you an opportunity to take the story in and again make it your story. We're not reading a story. We are seeing our own story portrayed in myth, in tale, in front of us. So thanks for joining me, for watching and listening some fairy tales. Go read the rest of the chapter. Pick up some other fairy tales that are maybe sitting in your house that you'd like to reread again. Get the oldest version if possible. Thanks for the likes, the subscriptions, for all the great comments that come on the pages, for people who have emails to send, for donations that come in, for the books you're buying. It's all really, really appreciated. And again, if you also have ideas for other videos, I've made a list in the last video of the ones that are coming up, so those will take the next few weeks. But after that, if you have some ideas, please let me know. I'm happy to see what might be interesting to look into for you. Cheers.